Hey, yeah, you ever wonder why we're here? Screaming and screaming and all happening. Screaming, keep it like that.
Welcome to the show that warms you up like beers with the boys, a campfire with dad, and all the other insightful and funny conversations you've ever had. Whether you're streaming or dreaming or seemingly fine, Squeaming with Forrest is right on your mind. Welcome to Squeaming, a show with only one rule. Always say the quiet part out loud.
Well, Stephen Kent, welcome to the podcast Squeaming. It's awesome for you to be here with us.
Forrest, Blade, very nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So why don't you explain real briefly who you are and what you've written lately?
Yeah, so I am the host of the Beltway Banthas podcast, a Star Wars and politics pod that has been running since 2016. I'm also a political writer for the Washington Examiner, kind of a talking head in the political news world, and a former show host for Al Jazeera International. I ran their sort of conservative libertarian talk program called Right Now with Stephen Kent. And I'm now the author of How the Force Can Fix the World, Lessons on Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. My book, my love letter to Star Wars and the political messages within it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've both read the book, and naturally we had some questions, and I thought it'd be fun to reach out to you to see if we can get you on the show. So I thought it'd be great to start off with an icebreaker question. Just feels like the most obvious question to start off with, but what's your favorite Star Wars movie and why?
Always a fun question. So Return of the Jedi is my favorite Star Wars movie.
Oh, that's my wife.
There's
yeah.
I don't really know why. The movie, I think, like starts off sluggishly. I'm one of those people who like the beginning with Jabba's palace, like it goes too long. When is this part going to end? But just like once you get into that movie, I just love the rhythm of it. I love the pacing. I love the cutting between the Battle of Endor on the ground and then in space, and then the duel going on in the throne room and the tempting of Luke by Emperor Palpatine. There's just a lot about the look of that movie that I enjoy, but I think the really like the deeper reason is that I enjoy the redemptive part of the arc for Darth Vader,
Right.
And those moments of conflict that we see within him. So there's the scene of him on the walkway on Endor, where he first is given Luke Skywalker after he surrenders himself to the Empire, where Luke tries to appeal to his sensibilities. And after Luke is carted off by the stormtroopers, Darth Vader has that like quiet moment alone where he kind of like he stares off into the forest and he holds the handrails. Woo, that gets under my skin in a wonderful way, where I just see that and I go, oh man, he just rattled this guy's cage a little bit.
Let's hope that the Obi-Wan Kenobi series will be able to capture some of that great non-verbal acting for Vader. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's where it's all at. Like that's the beauty of the character, and that kind of comes down to the crescendo of the movie, of course, where he saves Luke from the Emperor. It's the flashes of force lightning on his mask as he's watching Luke be tortured, and you see those flashes and he says nothing and he's just sitting there in silence making his choice. And I don't know about you, but like in his eyes I can see like flashes of the prequels. Like I can see Padme like flashing in his eyes, all that stuff.
Yeah.
All the bad choices that he's made are like reflecting in his eyes at that moment, and then he says like, no, I'm not going to do this anymore, and betrays the Emperor. And that kind of goes to like one of my gripes with these re-releases of Star Wars. The Disney Plus version of Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader screams,
no.
no. I'm sorry, like I'm not one of those people who get mad about the re-releases, but that change really aggravated me because the silence is what I liked about it.
It was much more powerful to me as a kid when he picks up the Emperor and tosses him away silently. You're able to get a sense of what he's thinking and what he's feeling just in the again, that nonverbal acting. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's always been my favorite movie. I think there's also something for me about green lightsaber Luke. Green is my lightsaber color, and I don't know. I guess with Star Wars, I get very like tired of all the blue on red action, just
Sure.
visually. And there's something about green versus red that I'm just very drawn to it. It's those scenes between Qui-Gon and Darth Maul when they're going one-on-one, where I feel like this could be me in this fight because I sort of see myself as a green lightsaber person. So yeah, I think that's for me. Those are the reasons Return just always is my movie.
Oh, that's awesome. Would you go ahead?
I was going to say how you describe reimagining, like, you know, Vader's scene, all the past scenes. I'm just like, that's a whole different way to view the scene, and it makes me want to watch the movie again just to like rewatch that scene with that different like lens to it, so to say. That really just that adds so much more to it as it.
Yeah, I mean, next time you watch it and he's watching Luke there, and of course you have to watch it the version where he does not scream no.
Yeah,
But
right,
watch his eyes. It's so amazing how expressive a mask can be in at the right angle and the right lighting. So like major props to whoever the cinematographer was.
Yeah,
because they knocked it out of the park.
For sure. Do you want to open up with one of your questions?
Yeah. Okay, so then what is a Star Wars moment that you wanted to talk about but either couldn't find a way to talk about or had to cut?
Yeah, so we talking about how the Force can fix the world here?
Oh yeah. So jumping into the book, sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a great question, and I feel bad because I'm the type of person who I can barely remember what I ate for breakfast. And I mean that like quite literally. And so it's like going back in my head 2 years to when kind of the manuscript was being put together. You know, I was doing the outline of the book and writing out all the potential chapters and what I was going to write about, and the book was going to be 11 chapters long.
Oh.
And if you all read the book, the final version of it came down to 7 chapters. So in writing the book, I dissolved 4 of them. I just 4 of them just went away. And it's partially because some chapters absorbed the subject material of other ones. Like I was going to write a chapter on like foreign policy, so foreign policy principles and restraint, and I was going to write a chapter on like when you have to actually confront evil, and I was going to do that in the context of war, and that ended up, I think, being gobbled up narratively by the fear chapter.
Yeah.
There was so much of the stuff that I was going to put into the foreign policy one that was already in the fear. So what I did was I just expanded the length of that one chapter, and I mixed some of my opinions on first order foreign policy. But I think then there was another one. I was going to write a chapter on family, because I think of family in and of itself as a virtue, and part of Star Wars' main message is that you can have a chosen family. When you have a family that you don't identify as like, these are my people,
Right.
You don't want to be a part of that family legacy anymore. I believe very much that your friendships can chart your new life and sort of give you a new sense of self. Star Wars absolutely is about that. But when I wrote the chapter on free will and Rey choosing her own name, choosing to be a Skywalker as opposed to a Palpatine, I sort of was looking at that chapter and I went, I kind of gobbled up again like a lot of the chosen family ideas that I was going to write about. So then the whole idea that like, the crew of the Ghost in Star Wars Rebels can like become a family when they're not biologically connected, that kind of went away. So I think that's like the best answer I have to that question, is that a lot of my themes kind of cannibalized one another, and what I ended up doing was doing longer chapters but fewer chapters.
You bring up the whole Rey Skywalker thing, which actually is a great transition to a question I had about how you had to cherry pick parts from the sequel trilogy and analyze them to find the value that they have. So is it fair to say that true value can be found even in some of the most despised parts of the franchise, because it's no secret that
Yeah.
the sequel trilogy isn't very well liked. It's a lot of people are not a fan of it. So what was that like for you writing this book and kind of looking through the sequel trilogy? You explained a little bit about how even you felt about The Rise of Skywalker. What was it like to cherry pick parts from that trilogy and make you go, but this part was good and we can, draw value from this?
I consume Star Wars because Star Wars makes me happy. And when there are arcs in Star Wars or certain Star Wars stories that are put out that don't immediately appeal to my like film nerd sensibilities or my child self, I immediately start trying to mine that movie or TV show for the good takeaways because I want to be happy. Star Wars,
That's fair.
Star Wars, yeah, I mean, like Star Wars is something I enjoy and cherish. And in another sense, and this is like, sort of a weird heresy to some people, but like I treat Star Wars very religiously. I don't subscribe to the you must be a positive fan at all times kind of dogma. Like if you spend any time on Twitter, you'll know that there's a lot of Star Wars fans out there who, if you are not anything but positive all the time, they're like, you're toxic, you're a toxic fan.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people, but what I am is that I treat Star Wars as like a part of my moral compass and as part of my secular religion. And so when a new movie comes out, a new Star Wars movie comes out, I take it for what it is. And I treat it like the next chapter in my sacred text. And I'm going to look at the text and I'm going to figure out what I like and what I agree with and what I don't. But I get very bored with the fandom discussions of whether or not something was good. I kind of just want to know Star Wars in its entirety. And if that means the canon changes, I want to know and engage with whatever is the canon. Like that's kind of my motivations as a Star Wars fan. I want to marinate in Star Wars. And that doesn't mean that I'm like anti extended universe or anti Disney canon. I just want it all. So that's kind of where it comes from me. It comes very easy to look at the sequels and try to find a couple of things. But that being said, I think you read me correctly. I don't love the sequels. The more I watch them, the more I go, we didn't think this through, guys. But what I do see is exactly what I wrote in the book, which is this cool arc at the end with like the Rey Skywalker thing. I actually like that.
That's fair.
I thought the plot twist at the end of the trilogy was going to be two things: that the First Order was going to be undone from within. I thought that the stormtroopers would rise up and wake up together because Finn woke up. Therefore, they've humanized the stormtroopers. So therefore, we should save all of them. But they didn't do that. And the other thing,
story.
and the other thing that I thought they were going to do, I was sure of it, was that the Jedi Order was in fact going to be dissolved, that there was going to be like the last Jedi and Rey was not going to be a Jedi. But I really did think that she was going to start a new tradition where people who walked in the ways of the Force were called Skywalkers. That was my big theory. I thought like people in the future Star Wars timeline were going to like call themselves Skywalkers if they were Force users. But that didn't happen. But she took on the name, which I actually thought was kind of cool.
It's kind of interesting to think of the idea that Skywalker would have become a title. You also mentioned you also mentioned fear. The chapter of fear kind of ended up cannibalizing some of the other topics that you wanted to cover. And that actually, I wanted to bring this up because I know Blade here will really appreciate this. So this is kind of a side comment. But I did listen to your most recent Beltway Banthas episode where you somehow managed to take the plight of the Cabbage Man from Avatar: The Last Airbender and apply it to the theme of of fear, the individual who has to struggle day to day while while the forces outside of his world are
My
affecting.
cabbages.
Yeah. Blade is a massive Avatar The Last Airbender fan, and I
Yep.
myself have the complete series on my shelf, so
Good for y'all.
I wanted to throw that out there.
The second book that I want to write is a politics and virtues of Avatar book.
Oh.
That's the book that like I want to write and I want to pitch to the publisher. And I probably am not going to, because the audience is so much smaller for Avatar The Last Airbender. Like Star Wars is like the Super Bowl of franchises. And I'm like, it was hard to sell this book. It would be really, yeah, I mean, it was really hard to sell this book. It'd be really hard to do an Avatar book just because like Avatar fandom is so much smaller. But I didn't mean to deflect your question, but I love Avatar. It's risen as one of my favorite fandoms.
The only thing I'll say to try to dissuade you from that thought and go for it is that I remember seeing on Netflix the huge revival that Avatar went through when it was released on Netflix, and I think it almost got the record for highest show watched on Netflix ever. Like, I think it's I remember looking at this a long time ago, it got like second place of
That's
most seen
interesting.
show on Netflix. So I think you've shown proof of concept of the Star Wars one.
Yeah.
Maybe there is room to make a case for the Avatar one.
That, I mean, you could be right, and I think there's two things. It's like one with them opening Avatar Studios at Paramount.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Avatar is about to go through a renaissance.
Yeah.
It's about to be brought back and expanded in a big way. And also, kids love anime. The next generation, Gen Z and below, obsess with anime in a way that our generation did not. Like, we were like, people who liked anime that are about our age were kind of like a small minority. I think it's switched to majority status.
Oh, yeah.
And Avatar is kind of like one of the most Americanized animes. I think it could be about to go through a huge boom.
Oh yeah.
Maybe you're right. Maybe I should rethink it.
I mean, at the very least, kind of get your how you can get your timing right when Avatar Studios really does come out. It just becomes much more mainstream.
I'm gonna think this over now.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we gave you food for thought. You want to go to your next question?
Yeah. So going back to the book, was there an intentional focus or was there an intention to focus primarily on the movies? If so, do you think it was because just the shows like The Mandalorian, Clone Wars, Rebels, do they just not have the same reach, you feel? Because I noticed you did use some examples from them, but did you intentionally focus on the movies?
Yeah, I intended to weave in The Mandalorian because of its massive popularity and sort of ability to transcend general audiences and loyal Star Wars fandom. And I don't know, I think there's something in the construction of the book and writing it, I just didn't get to it.
Mhm.
I didn't get to it, and I scanned back over the completed manuscript before I sent it in.
Mhm.
And I found one area where I could like weave in like a small Mandalorian anecdote, but I feel like I kind of missed an opportunity there. Honestly, it's a regret that I have. But about animated series and TV shows, I did intentionally exclude them because one of, I think, the troublesome spots about Star Wars circa the prequels, post prequels, is that Star Wars is starting to fragment, just like a lot of other franchises and even fandoms, where you've got programming for like the deep loyal fans, and then you've got general audiences. And I feel like Star Wars has not been able to connect with general audiences in quite the way that it should have. I think that's part of the sequel trilogy's fault, and the sort of ham-handed storyline that went along with building the timeline for The Force Awakens onto The Last Jedi. And then I think that also has to do with fans, and I mean casual fans, like, your neighbor who just like says he loves Star Wars and wears Darth Vader shirts, but he doesn't really, know anything about Star Wars fandom. They didn't know, like, those kinds of fans didn't know what the heck was going on when Rogue One came out and when Solo came out, they were like, "Are these the next installments of the trilogy?" Like, if you talk to people outside of our bubble, people did not know what was going on.
Right.
I remember I went to see The Force Awakens, and people thought it was the Empire. Like, people left the theater thinking the First Order was the Empire.
Yeah.
I was at the dog park last year talking to people about the newest Star Wars movies, and this guy at the dog park was talking about the sequel trilogy and like calling the First Order the Empire, and it just kind of made me realize that Star Wars story and the different elements of the plot have really kind of gotten away from the average viewer, where they understand I am your father. They understand the Skywalker trilogy and the fall of Darth Vader, but a lot of this other stuff is right over their head. So my long-winded way of saying, I wanted to avoid the animated series and TV shows because I didn't want to alienate people and make them feel like they weren't true Star Wars fans if they didn't know what I was talking about. I didn't want to tell a story about fear using Kanan and Ezra from Star Wars Rebels and the scene where he has to face these like ravenous cannibalistic creatures in a dark hangar bay on a asteroid planet where they land in one part of the show, and Ezra has to learn about fear in that moment. I didn't want to tell that as an anecdote in the book because I didn't want someone who had picked up this book for their son who's a casual Star Wars fan to then open it up and be like, oh, I don't know what this is. Maybe I'm not a real Star Wars fan. So I wanted to make sure it was top level in a way that made anyone feel engaged by what was on there. I made one exception though, and that was in the chapter on free will and choice. I cited one of the Star Wars comics, one of the Kylo Ren comics. There's the new line of Kylo Ren comics has a really rich flashback of Kylo Ren or Ben Solo being trained in Luke Skywalker's Jedi Temple. And in one of these scenes, Luke is counseling one of Ben Solo's rival students about Ben's natural talents. This student is very jealous and angry at Ben Solo's natural aptitude for the Force, and that she struggles so hard to pick up a rock with the Force, but Ben can do almost anything with that rock. And Luke sits that student down in the comic, and he describes the Force as a door. And he basically says to the student that some students and some users of the Force are born with the door a little bit more open than others. But anybody can open the door wide. You have to figure out what is blocking it, what is stopping the door. And if you remember Aang in Avatar: The Last Airbender, when his chi gets blocked, right? Is that the expression?
Yeah.
His chi gets blocked, and he stops like being able to do certain kind of bending. So he has to go see a meditative master to figure out what exactly is blocking his ability to bend. It's the same principle. And I thought that was a scene from the comics that was relevant and important enough to put into the book and explain to people. But beyond that, I did not.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair. Also, to just touch on Avatar again real quick, it was very obvious that Avatar: The Last Airbender was absolutely inspired by Star Wars in that it has a love for mythology, and for cultures, and having that very traditional storytelling of the hero's journey. And even how each book plays out is very similar to the original trilogy, I found when I finally watched it in 2020.
Absolutely. And I think that's a natural side effect of Dave Filoni having been involved in the first couple of seasons of Avatar. I think what was it, George Lucas poached Dave Filoni off of Avatar to put him on Clone Wars, I think is the way that went.
Good thing the show didn't find a dip in quality after he left,
Yeah, so it had Filoni in it. We always knew he was a deep Star Wars fan, so it was bound to be on screen.
Absolutely. What's another one?
Oh, okay. All right. So your book is a very optimistic book, which I really appreciate.
Thank you.
For the people who would
Mhm.
reply to your optimistic vision that you portray in the book with negativity or the assumption that things always could get worse, what do you say to them?
In other words, what can you tell hot takes on Twitter?
Yeah.
Black pilled hot takes on Twitter.
Yeah, that much of your own experience and the way that you move through your own life is going to be dependent on how you respond to situations. I am actually 100% a doom and gloom doomsday prepper type. Like, no, I really am. I mean, I think that we are headed towards very dark days. I am the type of person who I think my child will probably see World War III. I am the type of person who saves and puts away money for the possibility that there might be a time when I need cash in my mattress to live off of when the world falls apart again. I am one of those people, but that doesn't, for me, reflect pessimism. It reflects readiness and a willingness to be adaptable and move with whatever happens in the world. I take responsibility for the way that I feel about things. Um, there's an optimistic strand of the book, right? That Star Wars can make us better people, help us live more orderly lives. And I also tackle in the epilogue that the Star Wars fandom and this current state of, I think, Star Wars storytelling leaves a lot to be desired in some places.
Yeah.
But I take responsibility for how I feel about it. When I watch a Star Wars movie and don't like it, I don't immediately think, or sometimes I do, but then I have to keep it in check. I do not immediately run to the internet to go, who is responsible for making me feel this way? It must have been Kathleen Kennedy. She must be like working behind the scenes to try to destroy my life and my childhood. Because I grew up when everyone was saying that George Lucas had destroyed their childhood, and I thought it was ridiculous then.
Yeah.
And I grew up tired of it. I don't run to the internet to try to find like who tried to make me unhappy here. I look at a movie that maybe I didn't like and I go, what was it that I wanted from this movie? What was I searching for when I sat down in this theater seat? And why did I walk away feeling like I didn't get it? And I'm sorry, but like much of what I think goes wrong in every fandom, every franchise of fans, is that people do not want to grow up. We are sort of like in this weird Peter Pan society where, you know, our love of Disney and our love of animated films and our love of these big stories, like, I feel like it's kind of causing like a stunted maturity and growth with the way that we think about these movies. It's not that they're not for you, but you were a different person when you first fell in love with them. You were probably a child.
Yeah.
And for you to feel exactly the same watching it as an adult, I would kind of wonder, why do you feel the same? You're not the same person. You've experienced a lot more. You're a different person than you used to be. These movies are, in fact, in many ways for children. It's your responsibility to share that with people. So I just sort of try to channel my general optimism about Star Wars into helping other people love it, even sometimes when I don't. Because I sort of view that as a place where I need to work on myself and readjust my expectations of what I'm searching for. I hope that answers your question. I apologize if I went a little off
That's
track.
okay. It fantastically does. There was like it just shocked me, like, or like surprised me, I should say. You're like, oh no, I'm actually pretty, well, relatively cynical. But I think you did a good job of explaining how like you kind of differ in the sense of Well, of course, there's a difference between being ready and just being like, well, the world's doomed anyway, so whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if you have time, I write on Substack to kind of get my anxiety out from time to time. So it is thisistheway.substack.com. And I wrote a piece last week or 2 weeks ago called "You Must Be Prepared," and the point of the story, or the point of the article that I wrote, was that much of what Star Wars taught me is that there are going to be things that happen in the world, things that you don't like. You're going to have premonitions of futures that you think might be grim and ugly. I certainly have premonitions of the future that I think will be grim and ugly. But is that going to make me an ugly person? Or will I simply take that fear that I have and prepare for it? And preparing for it doesn't mean that you have to be a person who hoards ammunition and gold in their basement and hates and hate.
I never understand when people say you better start investing in gold, and it's like, not everyone can do that. Not everyone has the money to do that. It's
right. And there are other ways in which a person can be prepared for things that they think might happen that are bad. I just try to channel a lot of what I learned from Star Wars about how you're supposed to deal with the possibility of a bad future into dealing with it constructively, and not self-destructing like Anakin Skywalker did when he had visions of his loved ones being harmed, or not like Luke did when he had a vision of Han and Leia being harmed in Cloud City, and his big solution was to cut his training short and go lose his hand. I want to not be that person. So I try to slow down, be intentional, and be prepared. And even in some cases where I think the future might actually be bad, being prepared makes me feel calm. It makes me actually feel happy because you can't stop certain bad things from happening. All you can do is sort of batten down the hatches and be ready for it.
Sure. No, I think that's fair. I think that's really good, because I was talking in our last episode at the time that we're recording this episode will come out this weekend, but I won't even get into like all the different stuff that I was really obsessing over, the really kind of the dark, negative, grim stuff that I was really obsessing over. But I was obsessing over a lot of, news related things or politics related things, or even just global affairs. I became so obsessed with them to the point where it was consuming so much of my life. My wife had to tell me, hey, it's affecting me too, and it forced me to take a step back, reassess how I'm going about day to day, what I'm filling my head with, who I'm listening to, what I'm watching, that type of stuff, and having to do a lot of reassessments. And in a way that meant having to remember a lot of the kind of person I was, before the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, in 2019, I want to reclaim some of that, innocence again, and remember why my wife fell in love with me in the first place and why we get along so well. So to make a long story short, that's just some of the things that I've been doing lately, and I'm already noticing the positive change. And
Forrest, that's great. And it's great that you recognize that and are able to sort of step back from it and remember not only like who you can be, but also who your wife is in love with and who she fell in love with. And I have to check this in myself all the time. I like to consume a lot of podcasters and content creators that are what I would call like junk food, like sugar highs of anger, resentment, hot takes, and really eloquent slams on stuff. Like I mean, I love that stuff as much as anybody, but I have to always remember this is junk food. And if I am going to consume this, I also need some vegetables. I really I have to be very intentional about it, because I'll get in a bad mood if I listen to like political talk podcasters that I would like to listen to. It kind of makes me feel indignant and angry. And, I come to the dinner table with things I want to say and slam my hand on the table. I'll be like, this country is going to hell in a handbasket. Because I consumed too much junk that day. I always make sure I try to balance it out with something positive.
Well, not only that, but if you're able to change your mindset and kind of look at more positive things and think more positively, and also having that preparedness, not only do you not only do you feel a little calmer, but I also feel like it gives you a little more optimism for the future. Even if the entire future doesn't look very bright, there may be some great opportunities coming for a lot of people as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Service of others is one of the primary areas where you can search for a little bit of happiness when you're not personally feeling any. I've seen that in so many aspects of my life. I'll never forget when my dad, his second marriage fell apart. I was just finishing up high school when his second marriage fell apart. And that also came at the time of the 2008 recession. He was in he was in the realty business. He lost his job and lost his wife in the same month. And my dad, who had always lived upper middle class, 2-3 story houses in nice neighborhoods, found himself in an apartment in a not so great part of town, trying to figure out what the heck he was going to do next.
Yeah.
And what my dad did was he went to the soup kitchen and he served food.
Yeah.
And he was at a low point in his life. There were times when this strong, proud man was at the apartment and barely keeping it together over dinner. But once a week, he got his butt up and went to the soup kitchen and helped the homeless because they had it worse than he did.
Yeah.
And it gave him joy, and it gave him like a light in the darkness and just an ability to search for, if these people can do this, so can I. I do that in my own life when I'm feeling down. If I don't really know what to do, I try to mentor somebody, because mentoring somebody else can sometimes, selfishly reinvigorate my own energy. You got to give back to sometimes remember who you are.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Were there any
Yes.
Did you want to get into any of the other questions you have written down? Okay.
I did have one here that I'm like, oh no, we're not going towards it. But all right, so kind of going back to the book a little bit. So here's a question I have for you. So there are very few times that I, as a liberal, felt you've unfairly portrayed events. For the most part, I find your political commentary very fair and balanced. Is there a way to learn this power? Is there a secret sauce to how you went about writing to ensure that you weren't partisan or polarizing for most people?
Tough. I mean, that is tough. I think my politics make it particularly easy. I mean, I'm sort of a libertarian by nature. I skew much further to the right than I do on the libertarian spectrum. There's like right libertarians and left libertarians and all that kind of stuff. But I'm a right libertarian. But in general, I just simply, as a person, refuse to wear team colors. I really sort of resent Republican and Democratic politics. And I look at that entire organization of our politics as a death trap and toxic. So that being part of my personality, I'm sort of against the duopoly. It makes it pretty easy for me to look at different situations and go, okay, here's how this side feels about this. It's how this side feels about this. And here's how we should talk about this issue so that nobody feels spurned. But I also am just sort of fiercely independent in nature. I enjoy trying to put myself in the shoes of other people. When I watch movies, I get like emotionally wrapped up as an empath in the experiences of characters. I'm a crier. Like when I watch a movie, I get so lost sometimes in a character's experience. I start to feel like that person. And I think that's just a personal trait for me. I can barely keep it together every time Obi-Wan says, "You were my brother, I loved you." I can barely keep it together when Mel Gibson's kid in The Patriot gets shot. Like it's just as soon as that kind of stuff happens, I feel myself like embodying that person. I think that's sort of the life of an empath. But there was like a passage in the book where I talked about the January 6th event, and I can't pull like the exact page number and all that kind of stuff, but I called it an insurrection in the book, and I sort of took a moment to reflect on that event and how it made me feel. And immediately, this is of course the first thing that I hear about from my more conservative readership. They attacked chapter 2 of the book, and they're like, wow, I think you really got this whole thing wrong and read January 6th the wrong way. It wasn't an insurrection, it was a gathering of patriots. And I was like, did you get to the part of the chapter a couple of paragraphs later where I defended the woman in the Capitol, Ashley Babbitt, who got shot and killed by the security guard? And then the left tried to like make her out to be a Nazi without any sort of evidence. Like, did you get to that part of the book where I explicitly defended your right to life? Just because you object to the framing of what happened that day, I went out of my way to say, hey guys, this was bad, but also I wish you weren't dead. That's not hard for me. And I struggle to understand how it would be hard for anybody. So I think that is kind of where I come from on this. It's a little bit of personality. It's a little bit of my political disillusion. But, in general, I think for me, like my political compass, it came from Star Wars. Like, this is the way that I have always viewed the world, is through this whole nexus of like, if you go too far down the path of fear, anger, hatred, you're only going to suffer. And I think I just realized at some point when I was a Republican how hateful I felt a lot. And that's not a commentary on Republicans. My uncle is a Democrat, and boy, he is hateful. He's so angry all the time. And he literally wishes people bodily harm out of all the love in his Democratic bones. And I felt that way. I felt angry and tribalistic and sometimes hateful. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put this down. I'm going to take this thing, which gives me a sense of identity, and I'm going to put it down. And I did it in kind of a public way. I wrote an op-ed for USA Today in 2017, 2018, when I decided to relinquish my party credentials. And I did it just as a personal statement to be like, I don't want to feel this way, and party politics makes people feel this way. And I'm happier for it.
Good. That's awesome. I think it's funny. We're not like we're not going to go into all the details about, like, I guess why we decided we don't like this particular party, but I came from a Republican background and then switched to libertarian, and then Blade, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Go ahead.
I came from a Republican family and ended up going steadily over time to the opposite side.
Cool. My brother's a Bernie Sanders guy. Yeah,
Bernie bro.
It happens.
So you mentioned that you started this new thing, and I'll admit I was only able to skim over a little bit of it, but you started a This Is the Way. So is that a podcast or just a Substack?
Yeah, so This Is the Way is my Substack, where I write articles and kind of share some lessons on living, and a lot of them come from How the Force Can Fix the World. So I'm sort of pulling nuggets out of the book and its various chapters and sort of extrapolating out into whatever's in the news on a given day. But This Is the Way is also a series that I am doing within Beltway Banthas. I wanted to do something new in 2022. It's not that I'm tired of Beltway Banthas. I'm not tired of it, but it's been through many iterations. I've had panels for the show. I've had rotating co-hosts. I've had co-hosts who were dear friends on the show, and now I'm kind of alone doing it. And I didn't want to do more of the same thing, but I also didn't want to start a podcast from scratch. Like, my podcast feed has been populated for 5 years. So what I decided to do was like a series within the series.
Mhm.
So right now, Beltway Banthas is doing a mini series called This Is the Way. And they are short, like 10, 15 minute at most meditative bites of Star Wars advice for living a more calm and happy life. So every week, every other week, I'm posting these short meditations on there to sort of give people a good way to start their day, something that they can drink coffee to or drive to work with and listen and get off on the right foot that day. And it is sort of called This Is the Way, a series of Beltway Banthas. So you can find it in the Beltway Banthas feed.
Okay, awesome. I didn't want to keep you for too long, so I'm just trying to figure out how to get to the end. But was there any questions in your list that you really wanted to ask?
There's one other question that I have here that I did want to ask. You touched on it a little bit before, but what was one of the hardest chapters to write? What lessons from Star Wars was like hardest to put into words? And what lesson was like hardest to connect to like modern US politics?
So I think the hardest ones had to have been redemption and balance. I think
I love that chapter.
Thank you. I'm so happy with how it came out. And I think the redemption chapter had to have been the hardest because it was the most dubious to sort of walk through and tread lightly. Originally, the chapter was going to be about, of course, the path back to the light for Darth Vader and Kylo Ren, and what that means for our society, that these, people were able to reclaim their former selves and come back to the light. And I was going to write about criminal justice and sort of my views on abolishing the death penalty and stuff like that. But I ended up wanting to move a little bit closer to the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist is this thing called cancel culture, because everyone's talking about it. There's not a there's discourse out there about the death penalty, but not a lot. But there's a lot of people out there talking about what they call this thing cancel culture. And so I wanted to write a little bit about that, its origins, where it comes from, and then sort of this kind of quippy idea about, and I did honestly think this, and I think this was a widespread belief, particularly among more conservative Star Wars fans, was that Kylo Ren was not going to get a redemptive arc in the sequel trilogy. A lot of us did not think that this was going to happen, because, and I think we're relatively justified in saying so, because if you spend enough time on Star Wars Twitter, you can see the leftist fans, kind of railing all the time against, the fascistic First Order, and Kylo Ren being a space Nazi, same as Darth Vader, of course, and that like the problem with liberal politics, like neoliberal politics, was that they always want to redeem these people instead of having them, actually atone for their sins, pay for their sins. I think that's actually like a somewhat fair commentary. There's something to that, but I really didn't think Kylo Ren was going to get an opportunity to come back to the light. So I was watching with my daughter a marathon. We were marathoning the Clone Wars, and we got to the end of the Clone Wars series, the first end before they did the relaunch with the final season. And those are the episodes where Yoda travels to the world beyond to find Qui-Gon and learn the way to live on after death, to become one with the Force. And I did not know how to end my chapter and how to tie it all together, because I didn't want to make just some ham-handed point about like, guys, I know space Nazis exist, but we have to forgive them. I wanted to offer something that was from Star Wars lore that gave an answer, because that's what I believe, and what I tried to do in How the Force Can Fix the World is not use my politics to justify what Star Wars does, but to literally look to Star Wars for advice and like what Star Wars is saying about a given issue. And I look at the cancel culture thing, the witch hunts on Twitter thing, the let's destroy this person's career thing. I look at that as a hubris and self-righteousness problem. I look at that as a society of mostly younger people who grew up in a very online time, who can curate their own existences for their friends and family and neighbors, as being a little bit too addicted to the image that they project to others about who they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the person who I am on Facebook, is that really me? Or is that the version of myself I present to people? Look, I have a version of myself that I present on Instagram. I have a version of myself that I present when I'm doing interviews. That is part of real life. And what Yoda does in those episodes is he has to confront his shadow self. He fights his dark Yoda that the wills of the Force put him up against. They say at the end of this battle where he faces dark Yoda, at first he thinks it's a dark apparition. He thinks it's like an alien, otherworldly creature. But the only way that he can defeat this dark Yoda in this trial is to realize that that is him.
Right.
That it is not another creature, that is equally him.
Right.
Just a version of himself that he has chosen not to feed. And only when he recognizes it as equally him, the wills reappear and they go, "You have conquered your hubris." That's what they say to him. "You have conquered your hubris."
You want to? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, only when Yoda conquers his hubris is he able to achieve the ability to live on after death, which is what the redemption stories in Star Wars usually involve, right? Like one of the bad guys dying and then becoming one with the Force. It's not because they were a good person. It's actually because they confronted their hubris in some way. And for me, that was the lesson. And that was me then able to like look back to our real world problems and go, you know, we have a forgiveness problem, we have a redemption problem, but I think the thing that is causing that is a hubris problem. And Star Wars had an answer for that. And so that's what I focused in on.
Yeah. Do you want to get really pessimistic again for a second?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Let's dig in.
Don't do it.
Oh, yes. So Blade and I have actually talked, we've brought this subject up a couple of times throughout our show. And you want to talk about projecting a certain version of yourself through social media. I mean, you know, we've thought about and even talked about some of the ways in which people will be able, especially young people, will be able to project themselves now in the metaverse. You know, where it becomes even more real, and it, you know, like there's going to be, I think that those blurred lines between reality and this new virtual reality. I mean, I don't know yet even how easily accessible that will be to young people, but we know it's out there.
Yeah, I mean, and if there's a question there, I'm scared. I'm very scared. Yeah, I mean, about what that's going to involve.
Well, I think it's funny because I remember reading the Substack article that you wrote about how when the metaverse was first announced, your first thought was Ready Player One, which, you know, and that was, and yes, I've seen the movie, fun movie, by the way. And it had, and you were kind of thinking about these concepts and you were like, well, the world of Ready Player One seemed really, really cool, but I don't know about this, you know, and because Ready Player One even delved into some of those concepts of, well, how you project yourself in this world is not who you really are in the real one and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, we of course deal with this all the time, like down to like the funny matter of like people catfishing on the internet, right? But like also like kids on TikToks, like TikTok filters for people's faces and bodily features have gotten really sophisticated.
Yeah.
I don't spend much time on that app, but I do read a lot about TikTok, and I'm kind of shocked at some of the sophistication of people's like body features that they can use on TikTok. There's another show that I'm watching right now called Upload on Amazon. And Upload is about like a virtual reality afterlife, where after you die, if you pay enough money, you can have your consciousness uploaded to sort of an online like Sims type universe.
No,
And,
thank
and
you.
yeah, and people can modify themselves and change sort of their identities and change little bits about themselves, but only if they pay. Uh, you got to have,
Wow.
if you want to have self-expression, you got to pay more,
Wow.
for those features. That's like the future that I'm really afraid of, is a non-democratized VR world, a non-democratized metaverse and virtual afterlife where everything is monetized.
Mhm.
And he who is willing to pay a little bit more, like in the loot box fashion for video games, they're going to be the ones who get to enjoy and get the most out of digital life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it sounds like Black Mirror.
Hmm.
Yes. So, I guess to kind of wrap it up on a couple more positive notes, I'm gonna mention a couple of films and shows that I guess at least I really enjoyed over the last year, where I felt like these were actually really good quality stories. And I even wanted to get some elaboration on one thing in particular I saw you mention. So you saw the Batman just recently. And I remember how you tweeted out that you thought the politics in this movie was the chef's kiss, so to speak. Would you mind elaborating on that a little bit? I'm very curious on your take.
Yeah, so I enjoyed the resentments of the Riddler and the people who followed him.
Mm,
Um, I mean, obviously, Gotham has always been steeped in a class warfare sort of
mhm.
situation. That has always been what it is about. And
Yeah.
it has always very much been about the intrigue around Bruce Wayne's family and the relationship of the Wayne Foundation to the city and its corruption. And I have never seen a Batman story so nicely put together, like how the criminal and political elements of a city can use a charitable nonprofit for evil and corruption. I mean, this is absolutely real life, y'all. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying because I work in DC, I know things, but I do work in DC and I do work in the foundations and nonprofit world. And
Mm,
boy, howdy, there's money moving through these places
mm.
that is big question marks.
Yeah.
A lot of corruption happens in the world of charitable trusts,
Mm,
and I just thought it was really interesting how that movie um, told that story,
yeah.
and how the Riddler wanted to reveal it all. And he was sort of in the position, of course, he was crazed and Zodiac like in his serial killer aesthetic, but he also was doing the quote unquote noble thing, which was undressing corruption and wrongdoing in the city by doing it violently.
Mhm.
I love those kinds of complicated stories where
Yeah.
the villain is in fact somebody who is doing something that is somewhat noble in a twisted way. Uh, I also liked how in the end of that movie, the Riddler had his followers and he sicked them on the people of Gotham to commit sort of a random violence in the conclusion of the film.
An
Yeah,
insurrection, if I may.
yeah. I mean, it was scary. It was scary, and I mean, it was one of those things where they weren't gonna overthrow the government and install a new one. It was to inflict mass death.
Mm,
Um, it was a mass shooting type event on steroids. It was really scary.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
plot, a really scary conclusion. But I also thought it was interesting how there were only 500 of them who followed his
Yeah.
insane online account. I thought that was interesting. Like when the police and Batman were noting that like Riddler's been posting his ravings online and he was developing a fan base. I thought, and this is my like, I just like the liberal media establishment brain. I went, oh, I bet they're gonna give the Riddler like this massive audience, like Alex Jones or something. Like he's gonna have millions of people listening to him. But he didn't. He had 500 people who followed who followed his channel, and
Yeah.
I thought that was actually great because it was more honest to like how small and fringe the fringe radicals are in our society. They are a small group of people who can inflict mass damage. And I think something that we get wrong in our political discourse is ascribing like a majority status to the really evil, wicked, like online right or left or whatever.
Yeah.
The fringe is small. And the Riddler kind of proved that point. He had this tiny audience, but they were dangerous.
Yeah.
So I thought that's why I liked the politics of that movie. I thought it straddled the line really nicely. I did not care for Catwoman racializing the dynamic in Gotham in a way that
I remember. Yeah.
yeah, it was like a weird throwaway line, and they kind of like
Felt
never
that
come back
way.
to it again. And it's also like not really keeping in the tradition of Batman to have it be a racial dynamic of class. It's about the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah.
And I think if you're like a principled socialist, most principled socialists believe this as well, that the right way to stratify society is the haves and the have-nots.
Oh.
And I if you're going to do that, I think that's the right way to do it. But that's for the Marxists to figure out amongst themselves.
You had something.
I was going to say, like, especially when you're talking about the small following, that really made me think about how the internet's, like, you know, the general idea behind the marketplace of ideas, good ideas float to the top, bad ideas die, and how the internet kind of kills that because bad ideas can find the fringes to survive. Because, like you're saying, the Riddler only has 500 followers. I'm sure only a handful of them were actually in Gotham. It was probably like across a huge area, and they never would have gotten connected with the internet. So that bad idea that the Riddler has, like, you know, that bad idea he has just survives because it's able to find followers and find a small community that's only connected online. And because of that online community, they basically feed further into this bad idea and do something extreme, as we see in the movie. And you mentioning that, like, because that's a little detail I didn't pick up. Only 500 followers. So I was like, oh, that's brilliant.
It's this like weird little thing that changes a lot of the context of it. So I liked that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last film I wanted to mention before I head on to our final question, Dune 2021. I loved that film, but what did you think?
I did not like that film.
Oh man, I really liked it. I loved the story of the characters.
Such a snooze fest.
I loved it.
It was so beautiful. I mean, like, look, it was a beautiful movie, and that's kind of what everyone says immediately. Like, a stunning film, incredible scenes and incredible set design, and that is all really true. Also, well acted by everybody in it.
Yeah.
But it also is the case that I had not read Dune before. I had always avoided it because I like to avoid things that people tell me I must read. It's like, that's again part of my personality. It's like you tell me 20 times I must read something, I'm like, I'm not going to read it. I eventually caved and I read Dune last year, and I finished just in time for the movie. And the way they zipped through the plot, I just couldn't handle. Like, I could not handle how they completely erased the motivations of Dr. Yue in a real way for his betrayal of the Duke. They also like completely erased all of the intrigue that led up to the betrayal, where the Duke would have been suspecting his own wife as the possible traitor and all that stuff. It's just like they just zipped through the movie in a Spark Notes fashion, and I just really didn't like it.
This is the essay version of the book, right?
Yeah, and it's just
how you summarize it.
There's just no way that I could watch that movie and go, I like this, because I didn't like it. But it was beautiful and it was very well acted. It looked the way Dune deserved to look, but it needed to be a show. It needed to be drawn out and Game of Thrones-esque. And it just wasn't. It shouldn't have been a movie.
Sure, that's fair. Well, I'm gonna go on to the final question, and then we can do a final note. What are some ways that I guess people my age and younger, and yeah, I can say older too. It's never too late for anybody. But what are some ways that people can contribute to just helping the world around them become a better place, like politically and socially? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, you got to join a club. You got to join an organization, club, or group that is not oriented around politics.
Mm,
Um, it could be literally like just joining a bowling club, a paintball club. You could join a scouting organization and be an assistant scoutmaster or patrol leader. You could join a young professionals group. You could join the 501st and start costuming. The purpose of joining these organizations is camaraderie with people who come together to do a thing together that is not chart the future of the country and hash out who's going to be running for office and who should win and lose.
mm,
Our shared interests, our shared passions are how we build trust and relationship
mm,
beyond our tribal circles. The great tragedy of the internet and the great tragedy of social media is that the people who seem to be running it these days have determined that we like being sorted into like-minded groups and associating with only people who agree with us.
mm.
And they're not doing that for no reason. They're doing that because we actually respond to that. We
Yeah.
do respond. We do respond to like-mindedness and comfort of people telling us you're right, you're right, you're right, and they're wrong. This has happened for a reason, but it has not been good for us. And there's a book that I read a couple of years ago, and it's called Bowling Alone.
Hmm.
And Bowling Alone was a book that predated social media, and it was about the death of bowling clubs. That's why I mentioned bowling, because nobody bowls. It was about the demise of bowling clubs, and it sort of profiled bowling clubs in the 20th century as a way in which men and women kind of got together and built friendships, camaraderie, outside of their churches and outside of their neighborhoods to meet new people. And it tracks how bowling clubs dissolved and went away. And then it looks at that problem and extrapolates it out into larger society. Why the Boy Scouts has dissolved into nearly nothing and bankruptcy, and it's not the settlements issue that they're dealing with in courts. It's about membership and membership dues. There's nobody like trying to be scouts anymore. Why is that happening? Why do people not want to be in clubs? Why is it that churches are struggling so hard to fill their pews?
Mhm.
It goes beyond just an increasing secularization of society. We are generally becoming more reclusive.
Mhm.
And that is a tragedy, and it does us a great disservice. So I really do think you need to join a civic club or organization that is not focused on political outcomes. Because if you want to remember that Democrats do not eat babies and Republicans are not Nazis, the best way to be reminded of that is to go serve weekly on a soup kitchen right next to somebody who does not tell you what their politics are. And then you get to be their friend. And then you find out later what their politics are. And then you have to weigh that against the fact that you know they're a good person.
Mm.
That is what is going to heal our society. And it's going to be really hard.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I thought this would be kind of fun. In the spirit of your podcast right now, how about we conclude this by saying something that you are optimistic about? Like what's something you're looking forward to, or something that you're hopeful for, something like that. That'd be fun to wrap it up on a very similar note like yours.
Yeah, I'll just kind of go straight Star Wars. The Obi-Wan show. I'm very excited and optimistic and happy to get this next Star Wars thing featuring my boy Ian McGregor. He was just like, he was such a treat for the prequels. He made the prequels what they were,
Oh yeah.
and which was good, y'all. And to see him on screen again in this role, I am just going to be over the moon about it.
Mhm.
And I can't wait to sit down and watch it. And I can't wait to do it with my daughter, who is 11, loves the prequel films. And I don't know, it's just like, I'm going to sort of like get to live in this weird moment where I'm sitting down with a child that I didn't think at this age I would have an 11-year-old. I'm 32 years old. I didn't think I would have an 11-year-old kid who loved Star Wars. And I certainly didn't think I would be 32 and watching an Obi-Wan TV show.
I know.
It's like, these are two things I never thought would happen in my life. And they're both happening. And I am excited about it and grateful.
Yeah, I think it's fair for me to say I'm looking forward to that too. I'm really looking forward to the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. I personally don't care what the Grand Inquisitor looks like. That's the next weird little complaint on social media. I don't care for that. I care about the fact that we're getting a really cool looking Obi-Wan show. Yeah, I grew up with the prequel trilogy myself as a kid, so that's something I've had the most attachment to. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. At the same time, though, if I want to kind of throw a personal note on here, like I said, the last couple of weeks, I've definitely been kind of like going through a change in my mindset. So I'm optimistic for myself, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything, Blade? Or
yeah,
you,
I was gonna keep on track with the Obi-Wan thing and saying like in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, I felt like they did the Inquisitors really well and did them justice.
They did.
And so I'm very excited to see if they're able to continue that thread in this Obi-Wan Kenobi series, because especially if you go by the trailer, it seems like they're going to be spending a lot of time with the Inquisitors, not necessarily Obi-Wan. So I'm really hoping they do him justice, because how they did it in Jedi Fallen Order was amazing.
Yes, I abound with optimism, and Forrest, I'm glad you're kind of going through a moment where you're sort of, I don't know, reevaluating things yourself and searching for a change in your own life. I think that's great.
Yeah. No, well, thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it. Yeah, man. Well, I just concluded with this. So, where can people find you? That's usually the question
Best place right now. I would really love if you would run over to my newsletter, thisistheway.substack.com. thisistheways.substack.com. Subscribe to the newsletter. You can be a paid subscriber and be part of our community groups. We're putting together like a Discord and a Facebook group and all that fun stuff for kind of chatting and staying in touch, and also talking about issues and news of the day. And then I'm also on Twitter, Stephen_Kent89. That's Stephen with a PH _Kent89 on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stephen. It was an absolute blast to have you.
Yeah, thanks again for coming to talk with us. It was great.
All right. Well,
Forrest, Blade, it was very nice meeting you both. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Squeaming Guys. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review, comment, subscribe, whatever you gotta do to support us on the platform you're listening on. Be sure to have conversations like these in real life, be good to each other, agree to disagree, and as Remzo W. Martinez said at the beginning of the show, always say the quiet part out loud.